You're listening to the Minutes on Growth podcast, the show that brings you mindfully curated insights into relationships, spirituality, personal development, and everything in between. With your host, Tannaz, Hosseinpour. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Minutes on Growth. Today, I have a lovely guest with us all the way from Arizona, the States, Amanda J.P. Brown, transformational coach and author. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you and your audience.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up becoming a transformational coach?
Well, not such a journey. It's a beautiful journey. I went through some struggles early on in my childhood with my family, my parents separating, and then just feeling like there was some parental abandonment, and then ended up getting mixed up with the wrong people, dropping out of high school, and kind of just wandering through life for a few years. And it was a really challenging time. I didn't really have a big connection with my mom. I felt really alone. And then, one day, kind of after a few years, I just had this gut feeling of like, I need to do something different. This can't be all that life is meant for me to be. And I had met a guy at the time who was like, oh, you should get a job, because I didn't have one. And then there was this school that opened up, and I had dropped out of high school. So then it was like this opportunity to go back to this high school that was at college. It was at a community college where I could work on high school credits and college credits. So I really kind of threw myself into that, but I never did any of that personal work of any of like the abandonment issues or anything for years. So I went to school that was really structured and safe. And finally, I was in another relationship that was very toxic. It fed into a lot of my own beliefs about being a bad person, the shame that I was carrying. And it was just really breaking me down. And in that relationship, I just started to lose pieces of myself by compromising everything of who I was to make the relationship work. And it was really hard and frustrating. And that relationship ended. It was a very interesting ending. It was like I walked into a work party and realized that I didn't know who I was, because it was this party to celebrate 5-year anniversary for me. And it was the all-American girl, red, white, and blue, apple pie and ice cream. And I'm like, who is this? And that was like a huge wake-up call that I'd given so much of myself away to make this relationship work that I didn't know who I was. And it was kind of like oh my God, this is happening again. I don't know where I'm at in life. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want, but I know that this isn't it. This being in this moment right now isn't it. So fast forward a few more years, another relationship. I wanted to get healthy. I wanted to get fitter. I wanted to love my body. I wanted to really feel more comfortable in my body, because I felt really uncomfortable, and I really hated my body. And I was really unhappy with where I was at. And so I decided to join a coach and do a fitness competition. And through that, I kind of started my mindset work, and I started doing this work. In the meantime, with college, I'd graduated, became a trauma therapist for infants and toddlers. So I had all of that kind of in the background, but I hadn't been doing my own work until I met this coach. And so the layers started to slowly peel open. I started, doing more journaling, getting back into writing. It was something I used to do with my dad a long time ago. He was a songwriter and a musician. But when our relationship kind of crumbled apart, I stopped connecting with those pieces of myself because it hurt too much. And so there are pieces of myself that along my journey I didn't want to connect with because of either who it reminded me of, or it was painful, or I didn't want to be like that anymore. But those were really important pieces of myself. So through this process of like journaling, opening up, kind of diving into some of the things, the judgments that I had about myself, the criticisms, that's really where I started to explore more, reconnect with myself, and start feeling more empowered. And then the journey just kept going to where then I was like, okay, I know I want to work with women. I know I want to have a bigger message. And I was at a retreat in 2015 in New Mexico in the desert, which was a beautiful, beautiful place. And it was there that I realized I really actually wanted to be a writer. It was something I'd wanted to do when I was little, but like I said, I disconnected from all of those things. And I started writing there. And it was something that I shared with one of the women in one of the breakout sessions of like one of my biggest fears. And I was trying to think about all of it, what it was, but it was really about being seen and heard. And, when you become an author or, you start sharing your story, you're putting yourself out there, and it's very vulnerable and it can be really scary. But what's so powerful about that is as you do that, more people are connecting with you and they're not feeling as alone as well. So
Amazing. Wow. Thank you for sharing your story with us. That was so beautiful. And I noticed a reoccurring theme of meeting a part of yourself through your relationships, right? So every relationship brought a transformation of its own. And I I mean, I personally think relationships are the best way for us to grow because they either teach us what we want or what we don't want, which was in your case. And also, what I found was super interesting was that you were going to school for trauma, right? You were learning about trauma, but you still weren't able to apply it, would I say, until you did your own work, right? So is it like, because sometimes they say, theory is not enough. You need to actually practice that theory. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah. Oh, that's such an interesting thing. There is like this theoretical framework, right? And it's super powerful to understand all the dynamics. But then there's the practical application of theory, which sometimes is extremely different. And I do feel like you have to sometimes experience things in order to move through them. And that's one of the things that I work a lot with my clients is like, trying to avoid all of the things that we don't want to feel or remember or um, understand completely. And we don't have to understand everything. But I think the big thing is like feeling our way through it. If we just don't want to feel, we just don't want to be in that space, we're going to get stuck and we're not going to be able to move forward. So I think that that's a huge piece of the work is being able to move through the emotion of what's happened, through our feelings and beliefs and judgments about it as well, and how we're allowing it to kind of dictate the decisions that we make in our life. Because a lot of times the experiences that we have, even if we move away from that experience, we're still making judgments and decisions based upon what happened before, which can be really limiting to us.
Amazing. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I always say the only way out is through. So feeling your feelings. And we're seeing this more and more now. Bless social media because it's like we have all these wonderful therapists and coaches on there sharing their wisdom and insights and making the art of feeling normal. Like we're normalizing feeling, whereas before, it was such a taboo and it was such a weakness. So amazing. Thank you for bringing more awareness onto that. You mentioned journaling. I love to journal, but you said that you released shame, judgment, and criticism through it. Is there a specific technique that you use when you're journaling? Like, how do you go about it?
Great. Great question. I think a lot of it is free journaling and then being willing to answer the questions and ask the questions that I have wanted to avoid. So I think that, I talk about it like going through the darkness and like really being able to look at all the experiences that you had that you're upset with, that you're still holding resentment, still judging, and ask, how can this benefit me? How has this made me a better person? How has this enhanced my life? Which is a very difficult question to ask sometimes, because when we're in that victim mindset of how dare this happen to me, I can't believe this, it really keeps us trapped in our thinking. So this really takes us out of that thinking and really go, okay, so I can't change that all of these things happen to me. They happen. But what I can do is start looking at, how do I take what's happened to me and let it fuel the beauty and the love and the excitement and joy that I find in life? How can I take this experience? So it's really about finding the lessons in our experiences. And so really it's sitting down with your journal and being able to like talk about it. So I talk about this in my book, and like the 8 hero practices. And one of the practices, and I think in journaling, is getting really honest with ourselves about what our experience was and really honoring ourselves for that experience and going, okay, if you're judging yourself, and it happened years ago, you're not that same person, but she is, or he is, a very important piece of who you are and the becoming of you. So being able to like honor that person, that, the past self, as a powerful piece of you, and really finding like the empathy for those. And if you're judging yourself or criticizing yourself about the decisions you've made in your past, finding empathy for that person. Like, how would you speak to your best friend if she was going through the same thing? And so I already talked about exploration, but really being able to sit down, pen and paper, and explore and cultivate different questions. Sometimes we get so stuck in like the tunnel vision of our own experience, is being able to look outside and wonder with curiosity, what if I looked at it from a different direction? What if instead of looking at it straight on, I looked at my experience from the right or the front or the left or above, and then really kind of trying to play with that in that sense. And so those are like the first 4 practices. And I feel like that's a lot. So I'm going to let us pause there before I talk about the rest.
Amazing, amazing. And you're so right. Like when we're in a situation, we believe that the story that we have in our mind is the only true story, but there are so many other realities and possibilities out there that we can entertain that can give us a little bit more hope and a little bit more self-love and acceptance. Amazing. Thank you for that. And you said something that I wrote it down. Ask the question you want to avoid. Wow. Like, we don't want to ask that question, but I guess that's the question we need to ask. And we usually like to stick with the topics that feel comfortable to us, that feel known to us. The mind likes to, be in control. So amazing. I'm going to keep telling everyone this. Ask the question you want to avoid. Amazing. So in your book, you mentioned 8 daily practices, right? To be your own hero. And you just mentioned 4 of them. Do you want to shed light on some of the other practice? And what is your favorite practice?
Oh, that's a juicy question. So it's really hard to decide which one's my favorite, but I would say exploration seems to be the basis of like everything. So to me, that's really a huge practice, but they're the practices, and it's also one of my favorite and my least favorite practices because it makes me look at the things that I've been wanting to avoid. It's going to the unknown places that are ambiguous and new and unknown, and that's scary, right? To look at those things, but it's also one of my most cherished because it's where I found a lot of the power in it. The thing about the hero practices I'll mention before I go into the other four is that they really work in tandem and together. They're very synergistic and dynamic because sometimes you can't do exploration without being able to honor yourself or get honest with yourself. So a lot of times you're doing multiple of these at the same time. And one of the big things I tell my clients, and that has worked for me, is that start where you are with where you can go, and then slowly push the edges of your comfort zone as you work that muscle. Because bravery and courage is a muscle, and doing this work is a courageous and brave act. So anybody who's willing to look at themselves in a new light and really put themselves in a position of exploring the questions that they don't want to is very, very brave. So I want to just acknowledge them for that. So the last four are risk. So taking a risk, so answering that question that you highlighted is really a risk, right? By going outside of our comfort zone, we don't know what it's going to be like. But that's a very, very important piece. We have to take those risks if we want something different in our life. And we're not talking about risky behavior. We're not talking about that. We're talking about doing the things that you've been thinking about doing, but have been too scared to do, but you know that you need to do them. Realness. So showing up in a real way. So many times we put on facades, we put on masks, we put on things to hide who we really are, hide our feelings because we don't want other people to know because of the shame or the judgment or the fear of rejection or abandonment. And so really being able to show up very honestly and real also is risky, but it's that act of bravery, because the more real we are with ourselves, the more real we can be with other people, and then they can really truly know who we are. And the last two practices kind of sometimes are one practice. It's open-heartedness and ownership. So sometimes to take ownership in our life, and obviously we're never responsible for being a victim in anything. So I'm not talking about that. I'm really talking about owning the choices that you're making, the decisions that you're deciding things, and the perception that you're having. Owning those things and really truly looking at that means that we have to be open-hearted in that, because we have to be very gentle with ourselves, because a lot of times we can be very critical. And so this open-heartedness is about this love and this joy and releasing judgment and really being kind to ourselves. And in order to take ownership of a decision or choice or some thought we're having, we need to be able to be kind to ourselves, or it becomes a very critical act.
Amazing. Thank you. I love them. I must read the book in thoroughly and have my journal nearby, just journaling my feelings throughout it. Amazing. I mean, when you said open-heartedness, I thought of holding space, right? When we do this so easily for other people that we love, but for ourselves, we're so, exactly as you said, we're so critical. We don't really allow ourselves to feel safe to even explore our own feelings, and we judge ourselves for that. That is, I mean, you're absolutely right. Thank you. What would be your tip on learning to love yourself and accept yourself? Because now with the whole pandemic, we've had time to sit with our thoughts, and some of our thoughts, we don't really even like them. And we're even noticing that, okay, there are parts of me that I need to let go of that aren't serving me. But how do we, take it one step further and actually say, okay, I release it, and now I'm willing to accept myself and I'm willing to love myself? What are your tips on that?
Well, that's a juicy, juicy, juicy question, because it takes a lot. I love that you are focused on the acceptance piece, because I think for me, that has been one of the most powerful things, is being able to accept what's happened, accept that this is where I'm at, accept that, maybe things aren't the way that I want them to be. Just that full embodied acceptance is really powerful. And one of the tips or things of where started is really just being able to sit down with myself and go, okay, I know I'm not happy with all of these things, but what's one thing that I love about myself today? What's one thing that I'm accepting? And really start with where you can, because it's really hard. There's like those mantras and affirmations. And sometimes when we try to say, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, and mirror work is really powerful, but we can get caught because we feel like we're lying and our body feels it. And so one of the most powerful things I found is like, I'm in the process of accepting and loving myself as I am. So that whole part of I'm in the process of helps us go, I'm learning this, and really kind of work in that space. I'm in the process of this, learning to love and accept myself. And then start, writing down, what are the things that you enjoy about you? What makes you you? Who are you outside of being tied in a relationship to other people? There's so many different ways you can start and journey that you can go through, but really being able to just start where you are and acknowledge what you do appreciate or love about yourself. And if you're struggling to find even one thing, that becomes hard, because that means we're in a really, really tough place. We're in a really hard place. And sometimes that means we need extra help outside of ourselves. And we might need to find somebody to help us work through some of this, because there's probably something deeper going on that we can't than to do the work ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say that it's perfectly normal to get help as well, right? Like we need to remove this stigma that we have on like, getting a therapist or getting a coach or like it's amazing. That's how we grow the most actually, because people oftentimes see us in a much more beautiful light than we see ourselves. And they remind us of that. And sometimes we really need those reminders, and we just need someone to hold our hand and to guide us through it. As you mentioned, while you're doing the work on yourself, you might need some extra love and compassion. So amazing. Thank you for that. And I love, I'm in the process of, yeah, I'm in the process of learning this. I'm in the process of letting go of this, even. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Is there any last tips or tools that you'd like to share?
First, I would just love to say that, there's so many ways to go through this. And I love that you honored that other people are really important in our journey, because you're right. Sometimes people can't see, or we can't see what other people see in us. And we become shocked every time they tell us it happens to me. And when that happens, allow yourself to know that that's a cue of something you still haven't like embodied of yourself that other people can see. And so I would say one of the biggest things for me was finding my team, my cheerleaders, my people that I could rely on, people that I could talk to, because that's a huge, huge piece. Like I did a lot of my work in solitude, but I also really found that I was a processor and a verbal processor. And so I needed to have somebody to talk through things who would just hold space and listen and allow me to uncover these things. So I do think that that's another huge thing, like learning who you are through this process, and not being able to afraid to ask for help. I think that's a lot of times we're scared to ask for help, or at least I have been. A lot of the women that I know, because there's these concepts of what does it mean to ask for help, but just know that in order to move through this, sometimes surrounding ourselves with a community of strong and powerful people who love us as we are, and we can love them as they are, is one of the most powerful things, even if we're not ready to write it down, is just being in a community that accepts us as we are. So that would be one of my other big things, is finding someone, even if it's books, or I mean, it doesn't have to always be like someone in person. Like you said, there's podcasts, there's books, I mean, some books I've read have been like, oh my God, they're in my head. So I would just really say, start there, start where you can, and find support for yourself.
Amazing. You're absolutely right. I mean, thinking back on history, we are tribal people, right? We do our best when we're surrounded by people who believe in us and people who want us to succeed and want us to grow. And, there's no competition. It's just love. And that's a perception, right? You want to live in a world where you see the world as a friendly place instead of a hostile place, where you see people as supportive instead of, let's say, jealous or the opposite, limiting belief. So amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful tips. Super simple but so transformative. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and your community today.
Thank you everyone for listening, and hope to speak soon. Thank you for joining us this week on Minutes on Growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, then make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now.